Hello everyone and welcome to Medrash on the parshah. We're going to discuss this week a Medrash Rabba on parshas Shelach. We're going to stick mainly to Medrash Rabba for now. There's plenty to speak about. So this specific Medrash Rabba discusses a very famous point on this week's parsha of Shelach, which is that this concept at the beginning of the parsha begins with Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem telling Moshe to send Anoshim, send people, Shlach lecha Anoshim, to be basically spy out the land. The Medrash says that really this commandment, the Medrash begins, says this didn't begin, this wasn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu's idea. This was the idea of the people. And the Medrash proves its point, lays out its point, how you see that. He says, first of all, Hashem himself specified to the Yidden in a few places in the Torah how the land of Eretz Yisrael was a great and important land and how amazing it was in a few places. In Sefer Shmois, in parshas Shmois already, while the Yidden was still Mitzrayim, the Medrash says, Hashem tells them clearly. Over there, it's the sourcing that the Medrash brings is it says in parshas Shmois in Meraglim, it says ve'ered latziloi miyad Mitzrayim ula'aloisem in artzahiyah letztever chava, the land which is good and very spacious. And the parshah continues over there with other things. And it says later on there, it says v'Hashem hoich lifneim yomim b'amud onon, Hashem took them in a cloud. Right, this was later on in Sefer Shmois. In other words, that the cloud was there to protect them and take care of them. So they didn't really have nothing to worry about if they had any form of worries of what would, come in their paths trying to go to Eretz Yisrael. So the Medrash says, this is all from the Yidden. This was their personal request. And he says that there are psukim that even support this clearly, as a pasuk in Sefer Devarim. Right in the beginning of Sefer Devarim it says, "Vatikruvun Elai Kulchem." Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Yidden, you guys all came to me, and you requested of this. So says the Medrash, why did they do this? Why did the Yidden request this? So the Medrash brings some psukim to imply that the Yidden actually was their lack of emunah. The Medrash brings a pasuk in in Nehemiah, from Ezra's statements saying, "V'lo shamol mitzveisecha," the Jews did not listen to your mitzvahs. V'yamanu lishmeya v'lo zochnu v'leisecha. They refused to listen, and they didn't remember Yinaflice. In other words, part of the Yidden's refusal to listen had to do with them not recognizing and remembering Hashem's miracles. In other words, how He took care of them, and how they're nothing to worry about for the future. So this was a lack of their emunah. And the Medrash points out also they shouldn't have worried because he also had the Aron. The Aron itself also had certain capabilities. How they bring a pasuk in Bamidbar, it says Aron bris Hashem leisei lifneim, that the Aron actually traveled in front of them, lasu lemes menucha, to scout out for them menucha. Menucha is a place of comfort. In other words, that was the Aron's job, to find for them and basically make sure that wherever they're going to go, they're going to have a place that's for menucha, for them to be able to be tranquil. So the Yidden had nothing to worry about in that sense, right? They had all the, so to speak, technology that was necessary to make sure that they have the perfect spot for them. So whether it's because Hashem specifically told them, or they actually have the technology to find out what would be good for them. So therefore the Medrash concludes, this was because they didn't have emunah. And they bring up, and the Medrash brings a pasuk that David Melech alludes to this in Tehillim in Kapitel Ayin Ches. It says Ki lo ya'aminu, the Yidden didn't believe, and they refused to go in His Torah. Meaning, in other words, Hashem's directives that He said, this land is proper. You're going. This is where you're going to get. So the question is why? What was going on over here? In their emunah, what does that mean that they're lacking this emunah? So this may be possible in the next part of the Medrash. Maybe able to figure this out. The Medrash brings from Rabbi Yeshua that wants to compare this scenario of the Yidden demanding, requesting HaKadosh Baruch Hu to send, Hashem agreeing to it, and everything that unfolded afterwards, with a parable. The parable is a parable of a king. This king has a son, and the king wants to marry him off. He wants to find him a beautiful, good girl. And he found a girl that was beautiful, and that she came from a rich family, a prominent family, and she seemed to be perfect for the son of the king. So the king tells the son, I have a daughter for you, and she has all the qualities that you need. She's rich, she's prominent family, she has all the good things that are required for the son of the king. And the son tells the king, I want to see her for myself, because he didn't believe the father. So what happens? The king in this parable gets very let down. He gets very angry, and he's left with two options. One option, he says to himself, the king, if I don't show my son, the son's going to think he's not showing to me because it's obviously something wrong over here, and I won't like it. So the other option that's left is, I will show it to him, so that he could see, for himself, and that I was right. But the king says to himself, however, if I do that, the son cannot have it. The son cannot have the daughter, this child rather, this girl. It's going to have to go to his child. He doesn't deserve to get it. And this is what the king decides. I'm making this deal that he's actually not going to see this woman. He's not going to be zeicher to it. Rather, not see. He's going to see it, but because he's going to look. But I'm not going to give it to him. I'm going to give it, and he tells his son, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to your son, who hopefully will deserve it more. So the Medrash says this is the same. We could compare this to this scenario. He says the Kadosh Baruch Hu tells the Yidden, the land is great, and they didn't believe. Rather, they want to send people out. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says, if I withhold it from them, they're going to say, oh, it's because it's not good. That's why he didn't show it to us. It's actually not good. Right? Rather, what I will do, I will show it to them. But I promise that none of them will see it, and that what's actually will transpire after the story of the Meraglim. And Hashem promises that none of this generation will be able to see because they angered me. They will not be zeicha. Rather, I'll give it over to the children. So let's try to understand this parable, which is supposed to help us understand what went on over here, right? Let's get into the psyche of this child and this relationship between the son and the king, who is his father. So the father, let's look at the father's perspective. The king, or from a father as well perspective, he's trying to nurture his child. His whole goal was to bring him up, to give him the best he possibly could, the best chinuch, the best gashmis if possible, to make him, to bring out the most from the child. That was obviously his, everything he cares about. And, marrying him off to a daughter is no different. That as well, his plan is it should be the best for him. And obviously he takes everything into account for his future. And the father knows the child the best. He brought him up, right? He knew all his steps and all his difficulties to this point. And therefore, he's looking at this from a more wholesome perspective. He's looking for more a future perspective, what will be the best for him for the future. The son, on the other hand, is looking at this from a less wholesome perspective, more primitive, right? The son sees his own world, like every person as they grow up, and the world gets bigger as they get older. But when they're younger, the world is smaller, right? So they're thinking, my father doesn't understand me. My father doesn't know me, right? I have my weaknesses, my strengths, which I know the best, right? So I know what I want for my future. I know what I'm capable of. And therefore the son, not that he doesn't believe the father, but he believes that the father can never see things eye to eye as him. And the father cannot see, necessarily, even though he means the best for him, but he doesn't understand him. And therefore, when it comes to these scenarios, he wants to make his own decisions. He wants to be independent in that aspect. So, to some extent, we can say this applied in the Yidden's cases. In the Yidden's case, rather, that they believe in Kadosh Baruch Hu. They believe Hashem could do miracles, could do anything. But what they saw differently was they knew their weaknesses, they knew their strengths, they knew their limitations. And they perceived everything in their limited world. And they knew that Kadosh Baruch Hu wants the best for them. But they may have possibly seen that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has expectations of them, which is beyond their own views, their own scope of vision, way beyond with their limitations, possibly. So therefore, they thought Hashem has His expectations of us, but we know our chesronos, we know our miles, we know what we can accomplish, we can accomplish, and therefore only we can know. When we see a land, we know if this is the best place for us. Not that Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't mean well for us. Of course, He means the best. Hashem wants the best for us. But it could be He's overestimating us. This might have been the possible calculation. Hashem is overestimating for us. We have Yetzer Hara, right? We have our limitations, and we don't want to fail. We don't want to fail Him, so to speak, right? We want to do, what we're comfortable with. In other words. Now, whether this is, the most deepest fashion to understand this or not, this is definitely on a very important lesson on a scale in every part of our lives, in, relationship to other people, our own parents, relationships to HaKadosh Baruch Hu even, right? We may view ourselves in a very low light to some extent, in a light that, based on our own limitations, even our own expectations of what we want. But we have to understand it's always coming from a very primitive and narrow angle, based on our life experiences, based on our limited way of thinking. There's always people on top of us, right, that have much more experience, much more knowledge, etc., more years, see things from completely different angles, right? Now our own selfish angle. And therefore, we, in many cases, if not in, at least a big part of our lives, we're going to have to rely on those, perspectives, and, so to speak, forego our narrow perspective, because we know that these people are looking for our best. They're looking for what's the most important, and they're coming from, they want us to come to our tachlis. They want us to come to our, our best, and therefore we need to come onto those, right? Whether it's a rav, a mashpia, etc., as we're going to see things in a different light from that perspective. So this, in other words, what we can learn from this story, the Meraglim. The story of the Meraglim is that, we're always going to need this perspective of the mashpia to come to our best. Ours, and we need the mashpia as well, right? As long as they're coming, obviously, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective as well, right? So, in Mitzvah Hashem, we should be zeicher to this, and we should all take that into mind, every decision we make. Hatzlacha Rabba.